Okay, I think we're ready to begin. If we could have your attention, please. Is that how they do it? Is that how the art historians do it? All right, hello. Thank you all for being here for Esther's Artist Talk. My name is John Abbott, Assistant Professor of Painting and Drawing and Chair of Esther's Graduate Committee. Esther Elia is a contemporary Assyrian artist from Turlock, California, and received her BFA from the California College of the Arts in San Francisco in 2019. Since arriving at UNM, Esther has been the recipient of numerous awards and honors, including the Swain Family Foundation Art Commission Award, a UNM Summer Dissertation Award awarded for the Assyrian Prayer Bowl Archive Project. Esther was also an Assyrian Academic Research Grant recipient awarded by the Assyrian Studies Association, as well as a Facebook Artist in Residence recipient and Site Santa Fe Scholar. Esther also participated in the Guggenheim Summer College Workshop, culminating in an online ebook. Esther created a mural in Iraq, where she will be returning this summer with Professor Cruz to hold clay harvesting and making workshops for the Assyrian villages. This community-minded work is considered by Esther to be a love letter to her community. Forthcoming exhibitions include a solo exhibition in San Francisco at Parklife Gallery and a group show in San Jose of contemporary Assyrian artists by Assyrian curators that will be called Diaspora in Bloom. Please join me in welcoming Esther Elia.
Thank you. Side note, Diaspora in Bloom is a very exciting recent thing that is happening in the Assyrian community, and Assyrian curators is like huge for us. So anyway, I'm excited about that one. So I decided to call this talk Assyrian Amulets and Diaspora. That's kind of what I've been doing over my time at UNM. And I'm so happy to see you all. These are all my thoughts about the last 3 years. There's a lot more. I hope it's not boring. It's like a lot of like vomiting on the page. So that's where we're at. I would like to start this talk in remembrance of my great aunt Beulah, who died just a couple weeks ago. She was the last remaining genocide survivor in our family, birthed during conflict. My great-grandmother was pregnant with her when conflict started. She was born on the run from Iran and met with me several times in her home in LA to discuss her parents, her brothers and sisters, and her pal Al, who was my grandpa Alan, who I never met. And so hearing her memories about him was really wonderful. She died at the age of 99, one of the few in our family who have lived that long. And I'm so grateful for her joyful spirit, her humor, and her performative nature of storytelling, which I believe lives on through her relatives. And this is a picture of her with my painting, Swear You're Not Hiding Christians, which shows my family being hidden. Oh gosh, sorry. I'm gonna turn Do Not Disturb on. I forgot to do that. So it shows my family being hidden by their neighbor, who was a Muslim leader, and he's swearing on the Quran to Ottoman Turks that he's not hiding any Christians in his home. And she is the baby in the picture. And that man's courage is the reason I'm here today and alive. So just want to shout her out. So as far as my art practice goes, collecting oral histories from people like my great aunt Beulah has both been inspiring and deeply necessary, because when it comes to the history of the Assyrian people, much of the readily available information and the formal study of Assyriology focuses pretty much exclusively on our ancient past. When Assyrian work was discovered by archaeologists, they were very thrilled by the Lamassu, which is this creature, that guarded city gates to cities like Nineveh. They were stationed there to both protect the Assyrian people. They were guardian deities, but they were also there to intimidate anyone who was coming into the city and warn them about the power that resided there. Later, they were uncovered and museums were built to house palace reliefs, panels of limestone and gypsum that were carved to show processions of gods, prisoners paying tribute. They showed lion hunts and victories in war. And the Assyrian people became exclusively identified with our ancient past in these artworks, leaving me and likely many others with feelings of a certain inadequacy and questions like, how are we supposed to live up to the monumental artworks of a king's palace when that is the only thing that has our name on it? Assyrian monumental art became the standard for theft by Western countries, and countries like Egypt met the standard well, and many artworks were transported accordingly, but other countries like Palestine were ignored, as well as any people groups that were nomadic and created smaller works that traveled easily. These were more readily dismissed by the art history canon, which created this strange oversaturation of Assyrian art as compared to the number of Assyrians within Southwest Asia or the Middle East. And it gave us a very specific view of ourselves, one that wasn't necessarily accurate. So with this in mind, stories from my great aunt Beulah started putting human faces to the inaccessible awe of our ancient people as fabricated by the West. While I connect to our ancient past, there was ultimately an academic disinterest of who we became and who we are now. So this then became what I was most interested in. How do the ancient or the traditional and contemporary intersect? And how can Assyrians take back our own narratives, our own artworks, our own histories, and balance them a little bit better in their portrayal to the public? So 3 of my projects started during my time at UNM address these questions, and I will be speaking about them and the background to the work during this talk, which are the practice of painting stolen or smaller Assyrian artifacts to kind of reclaim those, the creation of the Assyrian Prayer Bowl Archive, which is a community project, and the creation of Diasporic Deities, which is on display now. So a while ago, I was in London at the British Museum when I heard an Assyrian voice speak up from a tour group saying, actually, did you know? And I knew immediately who was in the room. It was an Assyrian correcting the tour guide in the Assyrian section, which I admit is the only part of the British Museum I go to consistently. I know very little about the rest of their collection. And I knew that I enjoyed visiting museums that held Assyrian ancient art, which are all over the world, but I didn't realize how much I counted on those visits until the pandemic hit and museums shut down. And it became very obvious that there's a pain in like our people's artwork being taken from their home. And then there's another pain when we show up at places like the British Museum and inevitably like get closer and closer because they're like out in the open, especially these Lamasu. And there's like a sneaky little like touch that always happens and every Assyrian does it. And inevitably a guard is like out. And so that's painful because we're like, this doesn't even belong here. This is ours. This is my inheritance. And then when you have no access at all, it was another kind of gut punch. And it suddenly, I thought that I had access to my people's works. And then when the pandemic hit, I was like, oh, this is a very unstable relationship that we have with these objects. And then you hear things like 90% of our objects are packed away in storage. And so then it's like, oh, we don't have any access, hardly at all, to the majority. And they aren't, not all of them are photographed or documented, or even like, you don't know what are in different institutions' special collections. And so I mourned during this time a lot, to my surprise, because I liked going to museums, but again, I didn't realize how important it was. And I didn't realize that I was going multiple times a year, specifically to institutions that held Assyrian art. And so the lack of control became apparent, and it became necessary to paint the objects I so deeply loved, the ones especially that I had never seen in person, and the ones that were small so that they could be in my home and the homes of my community. I started buying books during the pandemic, picture books, and got to know ancient Assyrian artists by painting the works of their hands. It also became important to paint them in color because our artworks were always originally colored and were very colorful. In the past, there was such an excitement about digging up large Assyrian works and such a captivating imagination about the ancient people that could have done such wonders that we also know that to maintain this ancient narrative, archaeologists and museum workers would scrub off traces of color so the works appeared older. With this practice of painting our objects now in diaspora, I bring back color and the human hand. Because, in part, the creation of an ancient identity usually results in some kind of dehumanization of both the living descendants and the people who came before them. Some more. This specific dehumanization is illustrated well by my favorite artist, Michael Rakowitz, who spoke about this tradition of prioritizing objects over people in his artist talk, Ghosting, at Concordia University. When talking about the destruction of the Bamiyan Buddhas in Afghanistan, he speaks about the rationale given by Mullah Omar, who opposed the destruction of these iconic sculptures 3 times as the leader of the Taliban. However, when Sweden approached the Afghans with $20 million to repair one of the Bamiyan Buddhas, it was asked if some of the money could be used to feed the Afghan people who were in the midst of a famine, to which they said no. It was then that Mullah Omar changed his position and decided to destroy them, as he says, in the same way someone might destroy a hostage. I understand the thinking of this, and immediately in me, it's like, how dare you come to my homeland to see the works of my nation while stepping over the starving descendants that they bore. As if our current generation are not capable of greatness, and as if our story ended with the Bamiyan Buddhas. Many of the objects I have been painting have missing eyes and noses, either through age or intentional destruction. The nose is said to hold the breath of life, so often the nose would first be destroyed either on one's enemy's idols or carved figures, or on your own idols, which, side note, is part of the reason I didn't put noses on my large sculptures, just in case. But there's something beautiful in painting these about the blinded and sensory impaired sculptures that have been damaged, lost power, and somehow speak to our own place in history at the moment. I've always seen the movement of our objects as mirroring the movement of my people into diaspora. And so a part of me also imagines a future where these objects could be returned home and regain their senses, just as we might return home one day and be reunited with our land and sense once again our place in history. Ultimately, this practice of painting artifacts from books is imperfect, as much of what was taken is undocumented. However, it is healing for me. It starts to lessen the need of relying on institutions to give Assyrians access to our things, and starts to put our valuable artifacts in the home and reunited with my people. So now that I have started bringing our artifacts back home through paintings, we can move on to the problem of our written histories. So much of the time, our histories have been documented for us, which of course results in the 3 M's that I have coined for you today: misinformation, misunderstandings, and mistranslations. Not to mention large gaps in history where Assyrians seemingly disappear off the face of the earth. To combat these forces of institutions insisting our greatest works and histories are behind us, I started a project that would put Assyrian people at the forefront of communicating who we are. I started the Assyrian Prayer Bowl Archive, which prompts Assyrians to submit sacred words for me to write on bowls. They can submit prayers, this is a website, prayers for our people, oral histories, or a poem, as poetry is very culturally significant. And in this way, each bowl becomes a sort of mouth that speaks about Assyrians by and from Assyrians. So here are a couple prayers. I'm also collecting audio of each participant speaking their submission, hopefully for a future exhibition that is a room filled with writing, sacred bowls, and the sonic representation of our living, breathing nation, which I can give you a sneak peek of. Our history of Assyrians writing on bowls is interesting and was a large part of my research during my time in the MFA program. Writing sacred words, prayers, and blessings on bowls seems to be a Southwest Asian or Middle Eastern practice that spans Asia and seems to have similar offshoots in India and Africa. The specific practice that I've been looking at are clay bowls created in Mesopotamia, most significantly by Jewish, Assyrian, and Mandaic populations. It seems all study around these bowls focused on digging them up, shipping them to institutions, and translating them as objects that could give more insight around written language. This goal blinded many to their spiritual value, which became apparent in the scholarly names given to them, like incantation bowl or magic bowl. There were a group of bowls, in fact, that could not be translated by scholars, which were then given the name fake bowls in academia. But an alternate way of looking at that is written here. If you look closely at the script in some of them, it's not language at all, just scribbles that were made to look like writing. So we can see that even people who were illiterate were harnessing the power of writing, not necessarily language, to protect themselves. The spiritual tradition around the bowls was as follows. If one was sick or injured, he would go to an Assyrian priest, if he was Assyrian, or a lot of times it would be, even if you weren't Assyrian, you would go. He would ask for a prayer amulet, and there were many options, but let's say the priest decided a bowl was the proper way of healing this person. Artisans would have been making blank bowls for this purpose and giving them for the priest to use, who would take one, get out his codex of prayer prescriptions, choose the right prayer that had the right amount of letters, the right names of God, the right references to the right holy figures to create maximum efficacy, and would send that person home with instructions. These could include reading the prayer out loud, putting 4 bowls in each corner of the home, putting water in the bowl and letting it soak up the power of the words, then drinking the water, or for the demon trap bowls, burying them upside down at the entrance of the home, which would trap any negative spiritual force that might try and enter the household. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, this practice of making bowls became heavily discouraged by missionaries that entered Assyrian villages and observed the ritual. They were on a mission to convert Christian Assyrians to Christianity, but the Western kind, like Presbyterian, and were convinced that this practice was sorcery. There are still some Assyrians that make bowls, but they are few and far between, and between genocide, separation from our land, and conversions, many Assyrians have become unaware of this practice. Therefore, this project addresses several aspects. It educates Assyrians about our spiritual and ritual or forgotten objects, those objects as not celebrated, again, by the art history canon. It remixes the original practice of collecting sacred words, but since I'm not a priest and I do not have a codex, it focuses specifically on the power of words to provide healing, but in this case to a community. I'm putting our words on objects that are related to us, so not just paper and pen, but bowls, and therefore relaying a contemporary Assyrian history in a distinctly Assyrian way. And this project documents the contemporary Assyrian, where we're living in diaspora, and what languages we now express Assyrian thoughts in. Lastly, it asks us to consider our future, which is a salve to the wound of being pigeonholed in the past or thinking our identity lies exclusively in our past achievements. And you can see the prayers that have been submitted on this website, prayerbowlarchive.com. It's very exciting. And it's ongoing. I also had the opportunity to collaborate with 2 other Assyrian artists, Lolita Emmanuel and Diki Bato. And in this video, it takes footage of me making bowls while Lolita plays a piece for her PhD in piano performance. And Diki was cutting this footage together to show multiple hands, multiple prayers, living Assyrians and our ancestors coming together in art and music for the edification of our nation. So I'm excited about the Prayer Bowl Archive, seeing where it goes, because there's more collaborations coming. And this is just so beautiful. Lolita is awesome. You can watch it on YouTube, but just a little bit. Okay, you can watch the rest on your own, but it's really beautiful. I encourage you to do it. Oops, no. So lastly, I'll be speaking about Diasporic Deities, the show now on display at Sanitary Tortilla Factory. It's interesting, I think, when you're thinking about this, how the meaning of the work changes in the conception to the making, and then the installing, and then the viewing from others. And so there's a lot to say here as all of those things happened. But for me, it started with Kim Kardashian and an all-women's gym in Turlock, California, where I was born and raised. There was a time, if you'll remember, in the specifically 90s and early 2000s, when it was very popular to be stick thin. And during this time, I observed the special diets and starvation tactics that would sweep through communities. Interestingly, with this going on, in diasporic communities, it seems to also be a reality that the food we bring with us is the comfort food and the party food. Heavier meals that would have been eaten on special occasions back home are adapted for the everyday as we miss home and seek comfort in eating. Along with that, it was those who could hold fat, could hold nutrients, that were the ones who survived things like forced desert marches during the genocide with very little food, which then affected the bodies of those children born afterward, their own bodies holding traces of this trauma. A dear friend of mine tells a story of looking for a trainer to address her own struggles with weight, looking to get skinny and stick thin, when she found someone who told her that her body seemed to be perfectly fit for powerlifting. She entered a competition that weekend and won second place with no training. My own first memory of being told what an Assyrian was when I was a child, and I would just do pull-ups at the playground. And my mom was like, oh, like, whoa. And my dad was like, of course, we're Assyrian. Assyrians are warriors. We are strong. Our bodies are strong. And in so many of our ancient reliefs, they really define the muscles. So it was like very much always in the background. The first exposure I had to Kim Kardashian was a Skechers commercial that aired during the Super Bowl. It was immediately apparent to me that she was Armenian, born in diaspora, and was like a very familiar looking figure to me, having been born and raised in a community that had a large Assyrian community, and Assyrian and Armenians are tight. So the commercial was supposed to be centered around her body, but what I took away was that she was an Armenian at the gym, which was like a weird thing. And the public takeaway around her and her ad for Skechers Shape-Ups became, you too can build the Kim Kardashian butt at the gym. But for Assyrian and Armenian girls, many of us said, wait, are we allowed to have our natural bodies now? Is this okay? Seeing the celebration and also the public hatred of Kim's body exposed many of our lived experiences as a community. The Orientalist attitudes that prevailed around the bodies of Middle Eastern women as hypersexualized, inappropriate, and only to be consumed and never to be profited off of by one of our own. A friend of mine in Turlock, California, my hometown, opened a women's gym that immediately and naturally started attracting female bodybuilders from the community. My Instagram became a flood of pictures of Assyrian women in gym mirrors, flexing, showing off bodies that were now celebrated, showing off their new physical strength. At the same time, ISIS was sweeping through Assyrian villages in Syria and Iraq, stealing women and girls. Many of us were shocked, calling to mind stories passed down of the auntie who disappeared and was never seen again, the pretty cousin that was dragged away at the first sign of conflict by soldiers. Our women were being stolen once again, forced into marriages, or trafficked as sex slaves for the terrorist group. Then my Instagram feed became pictures of Assyrians in diaspora flexing at the gym, alongside images of women who had gone missing. We were all connected by the heart, no matter the distance, and there was a sort of fervor that I either picked up on or imagined in the women building their bodies in diaspora. I recalled the words, "Of course she's strong. She's Assyrian. We are warriors." As we were filled with rage and despair over our women back home, what could we do but prepare our bodies to fight, build the largest muscles we could? I started drawing female goddesses, bodybuilders with extra muscles, extra limbs, for fighting, kicking. The war in Armenia in 2020 increased my own fervor for protective amulets to get out some of my own rage, my own fear for my women, into images that might bring us protection or rally us in some way. I wanted to create imagery that spoke to what was happening in this current moment in my community, while also imagining a future where we could be strong enough to protect ourselves, intimidating enough so that we would never be stolen and used for our bodies again, even strange enough that we would not be desired. Suddenly, a monument became necessary, a monumental pair of statues that spoke to the bigness of pain and the bigness of our need for protection. As I speak about how we were pigeonholed by the art history canon, celebrated exclusively for our monumental works, it then becomes frustrating to then make a monumental work, for I do want to echo our large works while also recognizing that the largeness is only familiar because it was constructed that way by outsiders. I also feel I am forced to go big for outsiders to acknowledge me and my people. I feel trapped by that need to say, look, we are not dead. Look, you can't look us in the eyes. It's too tall. Look, you have to acknowledge that we're magnificent. I think many minority cultures fall into this, the need to portray literally that our stories are big and our pain is big. Once the sculptures were installed in the gallery, their monumental size became much more obviously apparent to me, and especially the shadows that they cast. That became like a shock. I wanted these imagined children of our deities to be protective sculptures for the figures to represent us while also watching over us, to call back to our beginning while also representing our present and the ways we have grown and changed. Their power suddenly became real when installed, and there was a moment when my nephew went in between the legs of one to be protected. A moment when I myself felt hidden by the size of them, that I could hide behind them and truly be protected. It brought to mind in a real way biblical imagery that describes God as one who hides us under his wings and protects us from harm. God, Allah, the one from Mesopotamia, who traveled with us as we fled the land where he revealed himself to my people. At the opening on Saturday, it started with a diasporic dance by my brother Cyrus to the song Macho Man, which says, "I've got to be a macho man," over and over again. The child of Assyrians dancing uninhibited in the ways he was taught in this new land to a song that sings the pressure we all feel. I've got to be macho. I've got to be a warrior. I must be strong. A line of Assyrian queens came next, some born in the homeland and some born in diaspora. They then brought the food we've kept with us for centuries, now made with ingredients grown here on this land or shipped from our homeland. Grape leaves foraged by hand by my Auntie Nancy, carefully preserved and frozen for celebrations. My community of builders that helped me construct the monuments, including the dog, then paraded, for I could not have done this on my own. A dog named Tom, dressed as a lion, was the diasporic representation of the animal we respected, hunted, sacrificed, and through which kingship was provided. And finally, with the entry music of the wrestler, the Iranian Iron Sheik playing, I entered flexing my muscles, a surrogate of strength for all Assyrian women. After remarks, it was important to then do one of our dances that has been passed down to us, the chika, which was done to keep soldiers warm and ready during times of war. While they waited for battle, they would hold hands, we interlock fingers, and dance to the zurna udavula, the reeded instrument, and the drum. Assyrians have continued to be vigilant, continued to do these dances of remembrance and readiness in places new to us, which ultimately speaks to me a hope for our future and an investment in our future. To do this war dance with outsiders represented solidarity and expectation, whether you liked it or not. Now that you know who we are, now that you have danced with us and eaten our food, now that you have communed with me and the art of my hand, I hope that you feel the call to action to stay informed, to remain watchful like these deities over my people. I hope my work does that, and I hope this show does that. As a final thought, I feel that what is happening in Iran right now needs to be acknowledged. My family is from the villages of Ada and Tarbash in Urmia, Iran. My dear friend's father, who was born and raised in Iran, came to the opening and immediately connected to the show to the current events. While I started these pieces long before these protests, it's kind of perfect timing and adds another dimension to the work. After the opening on Saturday, he told a group of us in my home the story of the Persian hero Kaveh, who, long story short, is an epic, but he led a revolt that rescued his people from a tyrant ruler. And that as the protests have continued in Iran, as killings and hangings have continued, the protests have not stopped. And on social media, Iranians cite Kaveh and say that this time in Persian history, Kaveh is a woman. That women are leading this revolt, and because it is led by women, it will succeed, as opposed to the protests that have been led by men in the past 30 plus years against the current regime. So with that, I am also adding my voice to that movement of strong women, praying they will be protected in the land that my ancestors have lived for thousands of years. And that is it. Thank you. This is it. Us dancing. Anyway, I don't know what happens next, actually. Is it? Oh.
You want to ask questions or?
Okay. Yes. Who has a question? Yes.
So a number of the bowls have, they have various different kinds of, I don't necessarily want to call them illustrations, diagrams, various different kinds of things. There were several that have a spiral.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about what
Yeah.
the spiral was and so
Yes. Let's just go to that picture. Yes. Illustrations. So these are a new type of bowl. These are the ancient ones, or even into more modern times, but the ones that I'm making, oh wait, I think I have, yes, are representing the languages you speak, the people who are living, breathing, telling of our experiences today. And so in these ancient bowls, there would be drawings of, so like these are demon trap bowls. There would be drawings of the demon that they were specifically trying to trap, and then a circle around them. And so when they buried them upside down, or when they had them in the home, it would take them. And so I'm, again, remixing this with my own illustrations based on what the prayer is. And so with a couple of the spirals, it is part of our ancient imagery. And also I'm doing, because I'm hoping to do at least 200 bowls. And so not all of them are going to have images on them, but the images do have to kind of be quick and just based on intuition. And so it's taking some from ancient imagery, it's taking some from diasporic imagery, and some from what the person tells me about their submission. Yes.
First, again, just thank you so much for that amazing night. Every time I think of it, it's like the North Star, and it re-guides me to why art making can be so powerful. I'm curious about what happens as diaspora continues and more, specifically Assyrian generations grow up, perhaps only knowing American. They're tied to Assyria, it is kin to our Yashin. How do you instill in them a sense of heritage and pride for a land that they might be several generations removed, or even their grandparents have never been.
And is not a country anymore. Is also part of that. Yeah, it's a big topic of debate. So my grandparents, great-grandparents came during the Armenian, Assyrian, Greek genocide in 1915. And they happened to go to America. But it took a long time, but they got there. A lot of other Assyrians moved to different regions nearby and didn't leave. There was one wave in the 20s, another wave in 30s, kind of. There was more massacres happening. Another wave during the Iran-Iraq War, another wave during the Iranian Revolution, and then another wave when ISIS entered the region. And so I would say the majority of Assyrians in diaspora are first generation, which then creates a little bit, without giving away community secrets, of so I'm third generation, which is very American. I think I'm mixed. I didn't grow up speaking the language. I didn't know my grandparents. They died before I was born. And so there is impetus for me to get to know that part of myself. I happened to grow up in a community that was largely Assyrian, and so that helps. But a lot of first generation or even second generation Assyrians are still very much in survival of learning how to speak English, for one, and getting residency and getting visas and getting settled. And so I think I celebrate the Kim Kardashians. It's a part of our contemporary history. When I saw her, I was like, oh my gosh, all the women in Turlock. It was very much, it was so familiar. And everything she said, I was like, she's Assyrian. She's Armenian. But it was everything was just this is how it goes. And this is the history. And so I think the main barrier maybe would be recognizing that is part of our history, that is part of who we are now. And these ties that we think are really important of language or imagery or going to museums and seeing art, cultural dances. I think there will always be people who are committed to maintaining those things. And there are also always going to be people that are going to shy away from all of that and pursue their own path. And I think recognizing that that's also an incredibly important about piece of our history is what we should do as Assyrians. Yes, Marcella.
Do we get to talk yet? I just want to, I don't know if this is a question or more of just a celebration. But first, since you were talking about Kim Kardashian,
Yes.
I don't know if you remember this, but in Esther's first semester, she had the first semester review, as many of you have.
Yes.
And so I always tell people, I think what they want from you is to see this art.
Yes.
Yeah? And what you have shown in this talk is an art. And I want to continue to tell all of you that need to be Esther at some point that this is an example of
Marcella.
the art. Isn't it?
Should we ever be so lucky?
It is an example of the art. And what I mean by art is you started the first semester review talking about Kim Kardashian.
Yes.
And I was appointed to your committee that time.
Yes.
First you said Turlock, I thought Waterworld.
Yes.
Or Raging
Yes.
Whatever, and I thought,
Yes.
I
Manteca water slides.
grew up
Yes.
in Waterworld. And then when you started talking about Kim Kardashian, you weren't really, in my opinion, weren't taken seriously.
Yes.
And
People were
that
like-
was when we bonded.
Yes. Yes.
We had a very serious conversation about
Yes.
Kim Kardashian and her being what you've just kind of full circle. It's like if you haven't seen the art yourself,
Yeah.
I just wanted to point that out to you that you have made, I think, one of the things that is expected and hoped for you. And I am sorry that I'm the only art historian here, along with Marina and Anna and Gabriel and Sophia.
I only found this out.
I'm kidding. We've adopted them. But your work is also an example of what I say all the time about, and I think just the other day I said, if your art is not researched, then I'm sorry. I am sorry for you. It should be. And so this is an example also of work that is researched and comes from like an intellectual platform. And I appreciate that of you and others. And I just wanted to point that out as something that is an example of something. Okay.
Thanks, Marcella. Turns out.
This is what it looks like. Celebration.
Thank you. Well, that's so embarrassing, but thank you. Yes.
I am just thinking about as someone who doesn't know your work until I stepped into your show and was totally blown away. The like presence of the bowls along the wall, kind of like in the shadow,
Yes.
maybe of the deities.
Yes.
And I, now knowing more about your work, thanks to tonight and your sharing of your research, wonder about if you think of these large deity sculptures as like their own kind of like a vessel in a way to these bowls. Like I think, you know, like see them so much. I love your phrase that the bowl is the mouth.
Yeah.
And in many ways, like these deities are these like forces, these words, these presence for the future. And so I don't know, I wonder if you want to talk a little bit more about like the bowls getting you to the deities, or the deities getting you back to the bowls and get that.
Yeah. I think, putting together a show is funny, and I was like, well, that's an empty space. Maybe I'll put bowls there. And then like the shadow over it was like, oh, it's perfect. Because I do think of the deities as protective, and these bowls as a very vulnerable piece of my community and like living community. And so it's like protecting them and shadows them in their words that they gave to me as a gift. And so there's that part. And then it was like over the 3 years, obsessed with deities. First year, obsessed with bowls second year, and then back to deities. And I think there is definitely a connection there. I hadn't thought of them as vessels, but they definitely are of my own hopes and my own what our future could look like, and a hope that they could be powerful and they could bring some sort of literal protection, truly. And I almost didn't put bowls in the show at all because it's kind of its own beast that's working towards the future. And I'm glad that I did, because I really do think that those two objects are connected, and everything that I'm talking about in that show is about protection. And so having a piece of my community actually in that room felt appropriate. And then later, this doesn't have anything to do with anything, but I just, like, in the busyness of opening and finishing the work and getting everything ready, it felt like I kind of lost a little bit of like my own prayer life, or my own meditation, or my own like sitting in the space and like making sure everything was ready. And it was a comfort to know that there were prayers in the room that were that are also, while being protective, are protecting the work and protecting the space. And so, yeah. No more questions. Is that good?